I'll never forget the moment I fell for her. It's burned into my memory. The sunlight poured through the windows of her parents' summer home, casting warm golden stripes across the polished wood floor, where I caught my own reflection blinking back at me. I grew up in a humble home, the kind that always smelled like fresh laundry and dinner on the stove. She, on the other hand, came from a world filled with luxury cars, black tie events, and upper-crust acquaintances who'd smile at you with their mouths but not their eyes. But none of that mattered to me that day. It was her laugh, those bright, hopeful eyes, and the way she talked about her dreams that pulled me in. I truly believed back then that love could close any distance, no matter how wide. "Can you stay a little longer?" she asked me one afternoon while we sat on a park bench near her family estate. Her name was carved into the chip paint, something she'd done as a kid. That was before the engagement, before money started to muddy the waters. Her dad, James, was a big shot in real estate. Her mom, Carla, folks called her C, was always organizing some kind of charity brunch or jetting off to Europe to do a little shopping. Meanwhile, I came from a small, tight-knit neighborhood where folks leaned over fences to chat, and you knew everyone's name. My dad had retired from teaching, and my mom baked part-time for a local cafe. We didn't have much, but we had enough, and to her family, that was something they could never quite understand. "I've got the early shift at the sporting goods store," I told her one evening. She leaned her head on my shoulder and gave me a little pout. "I just hate it when you leave." And in that moment, with her leaning against me, nothing else in the world seemed to matter. I didn't care that my shoes were worn out or that my jeans were from last year's clearance rack. I thought she loved me for who I was, not for what I had. Our love kept growing, but so did my awareness of her parents' opinions. Carla had this grace and sharpness about her. Just one look from her could quiet an entire room. And James, well, he wasn't a tall guy, but he carried himself like a man used to being obeyed. He had a way of saying things that sounded casual but always felt like warnings. When we finally told them we were engaged, James shook my hand with a grip that felt more like a formality than a welcome. "Congratulations," he said with a flat smile. "We're happy for you both." "Thank you, sir," I replied, a little nervous. "Just James is fine," he added. "We'll see how all this works out." That line echoed in my head for days. "We'll see how all this works out." There was a chill in his words I tried not to think about, choosing instead to focus on the glow in my fiancé's smile. But deep down, I knew I didn't quite belong in their world. A few days later, we visited her parents to talk about setting a wedding date. They had us sit down at this long, shiny mahogany table, the kind that looked like it belonged in a movie scene. James slid a folder across the table toward me. "There's something I need you to look over and sign," he said. Inside was a prenuptial agreement. It laid out that anything tied to her family, inheritances, trusts, businesses, expensive gifts, would stay entirely hers. Meanwhile, anything we earned together, like a big win or even something like a game show jackpot, would be split. The document had a whole section titled Financial Windfalls and Gains, which seemed oddly specific, like they were preparing for some kind of cash explosion. My name was scattered throughout in that stiff legal language. "The prospective spouse agrees to." "Is this really necessary?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's standard in families like ours," Carla replied, her voice as smooth as a silk ribbon. "I'm sure you understand." I looked at my fiancée, hoping for some reassurance. She stood off to the side, her expression unreadable. I guess it's not that big a deal," she said. "My parents just want to protect what's theirs. It doesn't change anything between us." I probably should have pushed back harder, but I was head over heels and didn't want to rock the boat. I told myself that if I truly loved her, signing a few papers wasn't worth making a fuss about. So I picked up the pen and scribbled my name at the bottom, tying myself to an agreement I barely understood. As I signed, I noticed James watching me with this strange little grin, like he'd won something. "Welcome to the family," he said. 7 months later, we had the kind of wedding people dream about, right on a beautiful lake, elegant and over the top in every way. My parents looked completely stunned by the whole production. There were flowers flown in from overseas, a cake taller than me, and even a live orchestra playing softly in the background. I'd never seen my dad look so uncomfortable in a suit. He stood quietly on the sidelines while distant relatives whispered, "So, how exactly did your son meet her?" Even with all that tension, the photos from that day showed nothing but sunshine and smiles. My wife looked absolutely stunning in her lace gown, and I felt like I could take on the world. In that moment, I believed we were building something real, something strong enough to rise above money and class. We moved into a fancy condo that James called a wedding gift. Truth was, he'd covered the down payment, but the monthly mortgage? That was all on me. James didn't say it like it was a demand. He just looked at me and said, "You'll handle the monthly bills, right, son?" So I did. Even though a part of me knew I was basically paying to live in a place he still controlled in some way. Our first few years were filled with the usual bumps, arguments about money, and how often her parents popped by without calling. Sometimes they brought in new furniture we didn't ask for, or had decorators rearrange our living room because they thought their version looked more balanced. Every time I voiced my frustration, my wife brushed it off. "They're just trying to help," she'd say. But I started noticing how much of our life was really theirs. Their taste, their opinions, their influence. Still, I figured every couple has family drama. We'd get through it. Then one day, while I was at work, my phone rang. It was my wife, and her voice was shaking with excitement. "You're not gonna believe this," she said. "I just won the lottery." I nearly dropped my phone. "Wait, what?" "I swear it's real," she said. $8 million. That's what she said she won. Bought the ticket on a whim while filling up gas, and somehow hit every single number. "Are you serious?" I asked, almost laughing from disbelief. That's unreal." My brain immediately kicked into overdrive. Visions of retiring early, taking trips around the world, maybe even doing some good through charity. We used to joke about what we'd do if we ever struck it rich like that. I imagined giving a chunk to my parents, buying a home we could truly call our own, free from James's influence, and maybe even starting up my own little business. I remember feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me, but in the best possible way. My hands were shaking from the rush. Everything was about to change. But as the days passed, that excitement I felt started turning into something else. My wife suddenly got real secretive about the whole thing. She said we shouldn't tell anyone, not even my side of the family. When I asked her why, she just said it was better that way. She told me she was meeting with some attorneys, names I'd never heard before. Said it was all part of properly claiming the money. "Shouldn't I go with you?" I asked. She shook her head without missing a beat. "These guys deal with high-profile estates all the time. You'd feel out of place. Don't worry, I'll fill you in later." That hit harder than I let on. I was her husband. Shouldn't we be doing this together? But each time I tried to ask more, she brushed me off. "It's complicated," she kept saying, especially when I brought up things like paying off the condo or what our next steps were. Her answers were vague, distant, like I was bothering her. One gray afternoon, I came home bone-tired. We'd been short-staffed at the sporting goods store, and I'd worked a double shift. All I wanted was to kick off my shoes and melt into the couch. But when I opened the door, I walked into something I never expected. There she was, alongside her Aunt Sarah, sorting through drawers and packing stuff into boxes. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice cracking a little. My wife straightened up and looked me dead in the eye. Her voice was cold. "I'm filing for divorce. Start packing your things. I want you out tonight." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. What are you talking about?" Aunt Sarah, tall and always a bit sharp around the edges, gave me a long, judging look. "This place is in her name. It was paid for with her father's money. You don't have any legal right to stay." My heart was racing. This couldn't be happening. The woman I loved, who had just become a millionaire, was throwing me out like I was nothing. "Please," I said. "Can we just talk this through?" She didn't budge. Lips pressed into a tight line. "My lawyer will contact you. If you're not out soon, we'll call security." I stood there, frozen. I'd helped pay that mortgage every month, but now it was like none of that ever mattered. I grabbed what I could, a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and walked out the door. Just like that, everything I'd built came crumbling down in a single night. Shaken, I drove to my parents' house. My dad opened the door and looked at me. Really looked at me, seeing the duffel bag slung over my shoulder and the broken look on my face. "What happened?" he asked, stepping aside. I barely got the words out. "She hit the lottery, filed for divorce, kicked me out." My mom gasped, her hands flying up to her mouth. My dad's eyes narrowed and his jaw clenched, but he kept his cool. He stepped back to let me in. That night, while my mom went on about how heartless and arrogant my in-laws had always been, my dad stayed quiet. Angry, sure, but focused. "You need to talk to a lawyer," he said. "We need to see how that prenup affects all this." I buried my face in my hands. That's the thing. Her parents made sure we signed it. I bet it leaves me with absolutely nothing. He paused for a moment, thinking it through. We don't know that yet. Let's not jump to conclusions. We'll find out. 3 days later, I sat in a small, no-frills law office, across from Mr. Hayes, a longtime friend of my dad's who handled family law. The blinds behind him cast these shadowy stripes across the desk as I slid the prenup over to him and explained everything. How James and Carla had pushed hard for it. How it was mostly about protecting her family's money. He skimmed through it, flipping pages, then let out a low chuckle. Well, he said, they outsmarted themselves. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. What do you mean? He pointed to a section and tapped it with his pen. They locked up anything she inherited, trusts, businesses, family gifts, as her separate property, sure. But they also put in a clause that defines any sudden gains or unexpected income during the marriage as shared. Wait, you mean like lottery winnings? He nodded. Exactly. Unless they specifically excluded that, which they didn't, you're entitled to a big piece of it. I just sat there, stunned. They really put that in there. Oh yeah, he said with a smirk. They were so focused on shielding her family fortune that they forgot to think about what happens if she suddenly came into money from elsewhere. That's a windfall, and the prenup says you both share it. A mixture of relief and fury washed over me. I was angry that they tried to cut me out so coldly, but I also felt this small spark inside, like maybe I wasn't completely powerless after all. That same week, rumors started swirling. People around town said they'd seen my wife out and about, shopping, dining, living the high life. And not alone. One friend mentioned she'd been spotted with a guy named Ethan, someone she used to work with at a marketing firm. Apparently, they'd reconnected not long before the lottery win. When I told my mom, she frowned hard. You think she was cheating? I shrugged. I don't know, but it sure looks that way. I couldn't stop the image from flashing in my mind. My wife, once so sweet and grounded, now living large with some old coworker by her side. Was that why she wanted me gone so badly? I pushed the thought aside. I was already overwhelmed by the divorce, the betrayal, the whole mess. But then came the kicker, James. One morning, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Listen, he said, his voice practically dripping with arrogance. You're not getting a dime of that money. You're nothing, James sneered over the phone. And I'll make sure you walk away with absolutely zip. I kept my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. That's not what the prenup says. He chuckled coldly. You think that piece of paper matters? I've got lawyers who play golf with the judges. You'll be drowning in legal fees before you see a dime. Walk away now, he warned, or you'll regret it. I ended the call with my hands trembling. Mr. Hayes had warned me they'd try to scare me off, and sure enough, the games had begun. My dad's advice rang loud in my head. Write everything down. So I did. I wrote out everything James said, emailed it straight to my lawyer, and saved the voicemail just in case. Things only got more intense from there. 3 days later, Linda, my mother-in-law, showed up outside my parents' house. She looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, all polished and proper, but there was fire in her eyes. I've got an offer for you, she said, glancing around like we were in a spy movie. What kind of offer? I asked. She handed me a folded slip of paper. It had a dollar amount written on it, not even close to covering half the mortgage I'd already paid on the condo. Take this and disappear, she said like she was doing me a favor. It's more than someone like you should expect. I let out a dry laugh. You're serious? Her brows pulled together. You come from modest roots. This is generous, given your background. Why make this mess public? I didn't say another word. Just tore the paper in two and handed it back. No thanks. I'll see you in court. She scoffed and turned sharply, muttering ungrateful, as she marched to her fancy car and sped off. Meanwhile, whispers about my wife and her old coworker Ethan kept popping up. One day, at a coffee shop, I bumped into Rachel, a mutual friend. Sorry if I'm crossing a line, she said gently, but are you and your wife separated? I saw her with Ethan. They looked close. I forced a weak smile. They're probably just catching up. Rachel shook her head. They were holding hands. The bottom dropped out of my stomach. So that was it. She'd likely been seeing him behind my back. And the lottery money? It might have just been her excuse to toss me aside. Still, I kept my cool. No scenes. No drama. Mr. Hayes acted fast. He filed a motion to freeze the lottery winnings. The very next day, her father's lawyers tried to fight it and lost. We moved ahead with a contested divorce, pointing straight to the prenup clause that said any windfall gained during marriage, including lottery prizes, was joint property unless clearly excluded. I'd been helping pay the bills since the beginning, and I wasn't about to back down. At the first hearing, I saw her again. She showed up flanked by her parents and two high-priced lawyers. Her face was unreadable, her eyes never meeting mine. Afterward, I caught up with her in the hallway. "How long?" I asked, barely above a whisper. She stiffened. "What do you mean? How long have you been with Ethan?" Her cheeks went pink. "That's none of your business. So while I was working overtime, you were cozying up with him?" My voice cracked. She glanced at James, who stood nearby, jaw clenched. Then she leaned in, voice low and sharp. "You have no clue what it felt like being stuck with someone so average. Ethan gets me. He's going places." I blinked, stunned. "I got tired of waiting for you to catch up," she added. "So I was just a stepping stone?" I asked, my throat dry. She gave a small shrug. "You don't fit into the life I want." I straightened up. "Well, don't expect me to just fade away. I'm not walking out empty-handed." Her eyes narrowed. "Oh, this is war now? You and your parents declared it," I said. She scoffed. "Then fine. I'll see you in court." She spun around and disappeared with her entourage. I stood there, breath shallow, chest aching like I'd been punched from the inside out. James didn't stop there. He tried messing with my job, calling my boss and hinting that keeping me around might hurt the company's future plans. Luckily, my boss wasn't one to be bullied. He told James to shove it. That same day, I got a nasty text from my wife. "You can't keep mooching off decent people. Grow up. Nobody wants you. My dad's done being nice." I forwarded it to Mr. Hayes and didn't reply. No arguments. No comebacks. Just more evidence. Weeks dragged on. The stress was crushing, but I held on tight to the one thing keeping me afloat. Truth was on my side. Hayes combed through every line of the prenup until he found the gold. One specific clause read, "All financial windfalls during the marriage, including but not limited to cash prizes, lottery winnings, and game show rewards, are considered marital assets unless specifically excluded in this agreement." And guess what? They never excluded the lottery. They had carefully carved out protections for inherited assets, trust funds, and any gifts passed down through the family. But funny enough, they forgot to mention lottery winnings. That little omission was like leaving the back door wide open. In trying so hard to protect their fortune, they accidentally gave me a fighting chance. In the meantime, the gossip about my wife and Ethan was spreading fast. Folks said they'd been spotted at nightclubs, high-end resorts, and swanky restaurants. One day, my mom sat me down and gently asked if I'd consider bringing her cheating into the case. But Mr. Hayes just shook his head. "We're in a no-fault divorce state," he said. "Infidelity doesn't really change the money side of things. The prenup, though, that's your golden ticket." That's when it really hit me. This wasn't about getting back at anyone. It was about standing my ground and not letting them push me out with nothing. The court date was getting closer, just a week away, and the pressure was building like a storm getting ready to blow. One night, close to midnight, my phone buzzed while I was nodding off in my parents' living room. I just spent hours sorting papers with Mr. Hayes and was finally sinking into the armchair when I saw the caller ID. It was her. We hadn't spoken in weeks. Not since the day she had me thrown out of the condo. My heart jumped, part anger, part curiosity. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello," I said, trying to sound calm. "Hey," she replied, and something in her voice was off. Like she was pretending to be steady, but wasn't. "Can we talk?" My gut twisted. "Talk about what, exactly?" She paused for a second, then let out this shaky sigh. I don't want this to get ugly in court. Maybe we can figure something out, something that works for both of us." I let out a dry laugh. Works for both of us? That was rich, coming from someone who'd treated me like a freeloader, tossed me out of my own place, and claimed the lottery ticket was hers and hers alone. "Go ahead. What's your version of fair?" She sighed again, this time more annoyed than nervous. "We can handle this privately. Sign a non-disclosure, keep it out of the news, and you'll get some cash, more than what we offered before, but still less than what your lawyer's shooting for. And in return," she continued, "you go away quietly. My parents stay out of the spotlight, and we all move on." So that was it. Another hush offer. They were still scared of what the court might decide, and that gave me just a little satisfaction. Still, it didn't stop the fire boiling in my chest. Did she really think I'd take another insult like that? "No thanks," I said flatly. "I'm done with the backroom deals. Let's see what the judge thinks. She snapped back, her voice dripping with contempt. You really are a fool. Do you know what my parents can do? One call, and you'll never find work in this town again. Maybe not even in this whole region. For a split second, that old fear crept in. But I swallowed it and stood firm. Then I guess I'll take my chances, I told her. Goodbye. I hung up before she could throw more threats my way. My hands were shaking, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. What if I was blowing my last shot? What if they did ruin me? But then I remembered everything, her father's smug face, her mother's icy stare, the way they shoved me out like I was nothing. Mr. Hayes kept saying we were on solid ground. That prenup was airtight, and any stalling on their end would be obvious to the judge. I took a deep breath and set my jaw. No more fear. No more bowing to people who thought they could buy silence. I was in it, all the way. When the day of the final hearing rolled around, the sky was thick with gray clouds, heavy like they were waiting to burst. I put on my best suit, nothing fancy, but it was pressed and clean. My mom straightened my tie with a look that said, "We've got your back." Outside the courthouse, Mr. Hayes greeted me with a nod. My parents stood a few steps behind, quiet but steady, letting me walk this road myself while keeping close. Inside, the air was thick with tension, lawyers pacing, clerks calling names, the whole place buzzing. I spotted her across the room, dressed to perfection in a fitted blazer and skirt. Her dad was right behind her, arms folded like a statue, lips tight. Her mom whispered in her ear now and then, shooting me daggers. They had a whole squad of attorneys with them, 3 of them, flipping through files, whispering strategies. She glanced at me, then flipped her hair like I was beneath her. In that moment, I could see it. She'd painted me as the bad guy in her story. The leech who wouldn't let go. Let's head in, Mr. Hayes said. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Plain benches lined up, all facing the raised platform where the judge would sit. I took my place at the petitioner's table with Mr. Hayes, while she and her legal team spread out across from us. The bailiff called us to order, and the female judge, around 52 years old with gray streaks in her hair, slammed the gavel. We're here today to determine the fair division of marital assets and the divorce of. She looked up, scanning our faces, Mr. and Mrs. I braced myself, trying to ignore the tight knot twisting in my gut. Her lead attorney kicked things off, parroting the same tired excuse. The lottery ticket, he said, was bought solely with her personal funds. He argued the winnings were never meant to be shared. Mr. Hayes stood up, calm and steady. With respect, Your Honor, he said, we have bank records showing otherwise. He explained that my wife had used our joint debit card, both our names on it, to buy that ticket. Then came the kicker. In the prenuptial agreement, he added, clearly lists lottery winnings as marital assets. The judge raised her eyebrows at that. She held out her hand and asked Mr. Hayes to pass her the documents. I glanced over at my father-in-law and saw his jaw twitch with frustration. Then my wife finally spoke. Her voice was sharp, defensive. I never meant to cheat him, she said. My parents were just scared of people taking advantage of me. Things got out of control. She tried to sound reasonable, even remorseful. I'm sorry if it felt abrupt. Abrupt? She had me tossed out with zero warning like a stray dog. I clenched my teeth, but stayed quiet. The judge peered at her over the rim of her glasses, unimpressed. Then her father's lawyer came out swinging, taking a more aggressive shot at me. Your Honor, he said, this man contributed almost nothing to the marriage. The condo was bought with my client's father's money. He was essentially freeloading off her family wealth. They actually used the word freeloading, and it hit like a slap. Mr. Hayes didn't flinch. Your Honor, he said smoothly, we have receipts, mortgage payments, bills, groceries. My client paid his share. In fact, he added, he contributed far more than they're willing to admit. We spent the rest of the afternoon trading evidence like punches in a heavyweight match. Every accusation they threw, we had a response. The courtroom was thick with tension, like the air before a lightning strike. My wife glared at me from across the room, her expression growing colder with each passing minute. I could feel the heat of her parents' stares, boring into the back of my head. Finally, late in the afternoon, the judge tapped her gavel lightly. Quiet in the courtroom, she said, her voice calm but commanding. All the lawyers froze mid-sentence, papers rustling as they stopped scribbling notes. The judge picked up the prenup with a small, almost amused smile tugging at her lips. I've reviewed the wording, she said. And it's very clear, any financial windfall during the marriage counts as a marital asset. There's no confusion there, she continued. The lottery winnings will be subject to equitable distribution. You could have heard a pin drop. My father-in-law clenched his jaw, so tight I thought he might crack a tooth. My wife stared blankly, blinking fast, like her world had just flipped upside down. The judge turned to her next. Additionally, she said, you removed your husband from the marital home without any legal notice, despite his financial contributions. That matters, not just morally, but legally. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mr. Hayes smirk, just a little. He tried to hide it, but I caught it. Then came the hammer. The court rules that the lottery winnings will be split equitably, with a substantial share awarded to the petitioner. She looked right at me. And he is also entitled to reimbursement for his share of mortgage payments, utilities, and other expenses during the marriage. It was everything we had hoped for. A quiet wave of relief washed over me, but I kept a poker face. Then the judge gave one last firm nod. We'll reconvene for the final numbers if needed. But that is my ruling. Court is adjourned. She slammed the gavel. All rise, the bailiff called. Everyone stood. My knees wobbled for a second. The war was basically over. As soon as the judge exited, the room filled with hushed chatter. A few reporters peered in from the hall, catching wind of the courtroom drama. Then my father-in-law stormed over to me, face red as a fire truck. This isn't over, he growled. You have no idea what we're capable of. We'll appeal. We'll... I cut him off, straightening my shoulders. The anger in me was finally giving way to calm. No, I said. It is over. The judge made her decision. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my wife standing alone, arms hugging herself. Her eyes were glassy with tears, but I could tell they weren't tears of sadness. They were rage. Her mother hissed something in her ear, full of venom. Mr. Hayes touched my elbow gently. Let's go, he said. Let them fall apart on their own time. But before I could move, my wife lunged. Her face twisted with pure fury, and she let out a sound that didn't even sound human. You good for nothing, she screamed. You ruined me. She swung her purse at my shoulder. I ducked just in time, but she grabbed my sleeve and tried to claw at me. The bailiff and a nearby security officer jumped into action. Ma'am, step back, the bailiff barked. Her father yelled, stunned. What are you doing? Stop it. But she wasn't listening. She was gone, lost in her own rage, sobbing, spitting, lashing out. You think you've won? She screamed, her voice echoing through the courtroom's high ceiling. You're nothing but a parasite fooling everyone into thinking you were decent. You lying, gold-digging fraud. I stumbled back, my adrenaline kicking in hard. I had never seen her like this. Not even during our worst fights. Across the room, my mom gasped in shock. Mr. Hayes stepped in front of me without a word, his arms half raised like a shield. A security officer rushed in and grabbed my wife by the arm. Ma'am, you need to calm down, he said, or we'll have to remove you. She thrashed against him, face twisted with rage. Let go of me, she shrieked. He's stealing my money. How are you letting this happen? Do you even know who my father is? The officer's grip tightened as he pulled her back. That's enough, he said firmly. Court's over. We don't allow violence in here. Her lawyer hurried forward, hands raised like he could undo the whole scene. Your Honor. But the judge was already gone. Another courtroom clerk came rushing in, wide-eyed at the chaos. The whole place was a mess of movement, suits, voices, confusion. My wife kept screaming, lashing out, even as more security closed in and restrained her. Her father stood frozen, horrified. You could see the panic on his face. He didn't know whether to jump in or back off. Her mother covered her mouth with one hand, eyes wide with embarrassment. The bailiff signaled for backup. She just assaulted him. That's contempt of court. She's going to have to answer for that. My wife spat on the floor, her whole body trembling with rage. He used me, she shouted. He married me for money. He's the villain, not me. All I could do was stare. My heart pounded like a drum. And in that moment, I realized how far we had fallen. Her, unraveling in public with no control. Me, standing there full of resentment. We weren't just a failed marriage anymore. We were a full-blown courtroom spectacle. Security dragged her out of the courtroom, pulling her toward the hallway that led to the judge's chambers. I could still hear her screaming through the walls, even though the sound was muffled. Her father ran after them, flailing his arms and shouting that they had to let her go. Mr. Hayes let out a slow breath. That was unexpected. I nodded, my throat dry. She lost it. We waited, sitting on one of the wooden benches, time crawling by. Eventually, my mom made her way over, eyes watery and hands shaking. Are you okay? She asked softly. I'm fine, I said, though my voice didn't sound like mine anymore. A few minutes later, a bailiff came over, his face unreadable. The judge issued an immediate contempt citation, he said. She's being fined for assault. He added that she'd stay in custody just long enough to be processed for the outburst. She's not facing any extra charges, he said carefully, glancing at me. But do you want to file for assault? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to. I was angry, still shaking. But another part of me just pitied her. She was breaking down under the weight of her own arrogance. No, I said quietly. No formal charge. The court's response is enough. The bailiff gave a small nod. Understood. A few days passed. Once things calmed down, she was released. Her legal team scrambled to finalize the settlement fast, hoping to avoid another public disaster. Word had already leaked. Even a few gossip blogs picked up the courtroom drama. She didn't get any criminal record, but her reputation took a massive hit. Then, on a cold gray afternoon, I found myself back at Mr. Hayes's office to wrap it all up. My father-in-law sat stiffly across from me, glaring. My ex-wife looked pale and worn out. Puffy eyes. No makeup. No smug smile. She didn't even look at me. Her mom hovered nearby, whispering furiously to their attorney. They passed me the final settlement papers, a lump sum from the $8 million and full release of any claims to the condo. I didn't hesitate. I signed. Mr. Hayes double-checked everything, then handed me the pen. Congratulations, he said quietly. My ex signed too, her lips pressed in a tight line. Her father shoved a check across the table. Take it, he snapped. Hope you're satisfied. I glanced around the room one last time. My ex stared off into space, completely checked out. When all the signatures were done, the lawyers exchanged nods. It was official. Settlement complete. No one said goodbye. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an update. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below and share your opinions. Your feedback means a lot.